Okay, so the third source of knowledge is logical knowledge. So these knowledges, logical knowledges are the knowledge that is derived from reasoning. So from the word logic, meaning there is a reasoning. So with this knowledge, we can formulate conclusions based on reasoning. Okay? So logical knowledge help us make or help us find an answer or solution related to reasoning. So how does it work? So let's say for example, okay? Example. So in a specific research, you are to find out the effectiveness of a certain disinfectant. Okay? Now, how do we determine if a certain disinfectant is effective on killing a certain species of bacteria? Okay? By doing so, we conduct an experimentation known as the antibacterial assay. So this is the kind of method to be used to determine the effectiveness of a certain brand of disinfectant that can kill a certain bacteria. Okay. Now, this antibacterial assay will use a measurement. And that measurement will be known as the zone of inhibition. So what do we mean by the zone of inhibition? The zone of inhibition is the area that disappeared right after the application of the disinfectant. Okay, meaning to say, the zone of inhibition will determine the effectiveness of a certain disinfectant. So, try to copy this concept so we can now proceed. Okay, so let's say for instance that there are two disinfectants, brand X and brand Y. Okay, then this will be the petri dish. Okay, the petri dish is where we put the bacteria. So let's say this is the bacteria and this is another bacteria here. So different petri dishes. Okay, so we have these bacteria. Now, upon the application, so let's say we applied brand X to this petri dish, there was a removal of bacteria, and the diameter measured, let's say, 10 millimeters. This 10 millimeters is the zone of inhibition. Okay, now, suppose you applied brand Y. Okay, suppose you applied brand Y in this petri dish, then it produced a diameter of 13 millimeters. So this 13 millimeters is the zone of inhibition, the measurement of zone of inhibition. Now, with these findings, you arrive at a conclusion. Okay, conclusion. So that conclusion is both disinfectants are effective. Okay, that is one of the main conclusion. However, However, brand Y, okay, showed a higher zone of inhibition than brand X. So we can also conclude that brand Y is much effective than brand X. Okay? So brand Y is much effective than brand X. So that is our conclusion for this experimental setup. Now, how do we arrive with that conclusion? Okay, how do we say that that was the conclusion? It is simply because of logical knowledge. Now, what is the reason that we have that conclusion? Okay, so let's try to discuss it once more. So, we concluded that both are effective. However, brand Y is much effective than brand X. Now, how did we arrive with that conclusion? It's because we have the reason. Okay, we have the reasoning. And what is that reason? There was an increase. Okay, there was an increase in zone of inhibition. Okay, please do not use the abbreviation. This is just my shorthand term, but write it down, zone of inhibition. Okay, there was an increase in zone of inhibition for both products. However, brand Y showed a higher zone of inhibition than brand X. That is why it is much effective. So that is the reason to our conclusion, and it is derived from our logical knowledge. Okay, because we had the process of reasoning. Okay, so that is all for logical knowledge. Now for our next video presentation, we will be discussing the last source of knowledge, which is empirical knowledge.